Hello, and welcome to the Week 10 Rest of Season Top 150 Rankings Show. Today, we're going to cover all the biggest changes we made to our Rest of Season rankings. Be sure to stay tuned to the end as we'll give our favorite moves to make this week. All right, guys. I didn't expect Tony Pollard to have a good game against the Eagles. It is very hard to run the football against the Eagles. Also, I know I complained about this on the show with Silva. What kind of sport do you have to come off the sideline and talk to a ref in order for there not to be a penalty? It makes no sense. But Pollard would look a lot better if that touchdown had gotten in. I do think he's run a little bit bad, but there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that he has been not good as a runner. They have gone to a more pass-heavy scheme. And I do think there's some risk in Rico Dowdle getting more and more work here. We are sticking with Tony Pollard, though, still here in the first two rounds. If we were redrafting today, Mark, we're going to talk to the people about how you think about Tony Pollard right now and rest of season. And by the way, I should note their rest of season schedule is very favorable to Tony Pollard. Starting this week, home game against the Giants.
Yeah, I think initially just looking rest of season, the next 3 weeks, you mentioned they get Giants at home this week as 16-point favorites. They travel on the road to play Carolina. Likely will be double-digit favorites there. And then they get Washington at home. So just three absolute dream matchups for Tony Pollard coming up. And while the efficiency, I think the efficiency here is probably the biggest concern. You mentioned that, the touchdown got called off the board this past week. He still holds a really commanding lead over rushes inside the 10-yard line. He has 18 this season. Rico Dowdle has 4. Dak Prescott just 1. So if he doesn't score a touchdown this weekend, people are certainly going to be completely done with him, even more so than they are now. But yeah, I mean, certainly the Dallas came out of their bye in week 7 and have had their 2 highest pass rate over expectation games in back-to-back weeks. So I do think like volume here is a bit of a concern. And then when you compound that with the efficiency concerns, I don't think he belongs in that upper echelon of fantasy running backs we were kind of expecting him to be in at the beginning of this season. But this RB4 to RB11 range, I think, is really just kind of like mix and match each week given matchups because the volume is kind of similar with all these guys. So I do think rest of the way, especially given the matchup he's passes by, I think he deserves to be an RB1 still rest of the season, but it's certainly a bit more fragile, again, just given inefficiency and the potential for Rico Dowdle to take more touches.
Yeah, and I know I said that Dak and the Cowboys pass game has been on fire and they've been leaning into the pass really hard. When you play Giants as 16-point favorite, Panthers as, whatever they're going to be, 10 or 12, and then Commanders, they can do whatever they want against, it's going to start looking better for Tony Pollard, at least a little bit. But yeah, I'm still worried on the McCarthy stuff. I'm still worried that they are not getting him involved in the pass game or not scheming him anything in space. And so, these guys that are in this range here, we have him in the same tier as Josh Jacobs, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Kamara, JT. You can mix and match those however you want. Like Mark said, I'm probably higher on JT out of this group than the rest of them. But yeah, certainly a good setup for Tony Pollard here going forward. While we're talking about this tier here, Jack, we can talk about the Seattle backfield where Kenneth Walker, I think somewhat predictably, did not cede nearly as much as he ceded to Zach Charbonnet in week 8. Kenneth Walker remains, I think, a pretty elite asset to have. And I want to have Charbonnet on my team also for a little bit of standalone value and then massive contingent value on Zach Charbonnet. But yeah, how do you see Seattle backfield? Jack, would you be holding, buying, or selling on Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, so Charbonnet actually outsnapped Walker for the second straight game, but a lot of that was in garbage time when the Seahawks were down like 30 points or whatever. Yeah. When the game was still in question, Kenneth Walker still had his role on early downs. PFF noted that he outsnapped Charbonnet 21-5 on early downs. Charbonnet has taken over the passing down role from DJ Dallas. So I do think that Kenneth Walker is still going to be a guy who, when the Seahawks are in decent game script, he's going to get a lot of carries. And so from a pure volume perspective, I think he makes sense as a buy low. The only problem with Walker is that they play the 49ers twice. They play the Cowboys still. They play the Eagles. So it's just a pretty brutal schedule for getting into positive game script for Seattle the rest of the way. So I'm not really worried about Charbonnet eating into Kenneth Walker's role because I still think he has the early down stuff, and he never really has been much of a pass catcher. It's more the schedule that would give me a little bit of pause, but I think if someone in your league is panicking, Walker has like 10 total PPR points the past couple weeks.
Yeah.
I don't mind him as a buy low.
Okay. I mentioned the JT stuff. So last week, one of my moves to make was buy JT just to try to get ahead of the split widening. I didn't think it would be this drastic, this fast. Last week, Jonathan Taylor easily smoked Zach Moss in almost every usage category. It still wasn't blow up game for Jonathan Taylor. So maybe if someone's sleeping on this in your league, you could still trade for Jonathan Taylor. I would like that move plenty if people wanted to do that. And then the other guy in this range that we have to talk about, Mark, is Kamara, because it was scary for Kamara on Sunday. They came out giving Jamal Williams a ton of work. They schemed a ton of work to Taysom Hill. It was a mess for Kamara. He only played 49% of the snaps. And like, I did not see that coming on Alvin Kamara. So yeah, as we continue through this running back range, how would you be handling it if you had Kamara right now?
Yeah, on Kamara, it's tough because you mentioned Jamal Williams' role picked up a lot, and they're mixing in Taysom Hill a ton, especially around the goal line. So in the last 3 weeks, we've seen Alvin Kamara's snap shares go from 72% to 58% down to 50% this past week. And Jamal Williams, has been ascending coming off of IR. He got up to 42% of the snaps this past week. And then Kendre Miller even mixed in for 10% as well. So it's really tough having a three-way committee there. And then again, Taysom as well, mixing in for touches. So I think we can feel very secure about Kamara's pass game role. He still caught 4 balls, especially, and if they're going to be trailing, the Saints have a super favorable schedule still, but I think the pass game role is there. But in half PPR, when we're not getting the goal line touches, and then, there's some concern just overall around the rush volume with head coach Dennis Allen saying how much he loved having Jamal Williams out there and complimenting his blocking. Like, that's been a consistent, thing to praise for Jamal Williams of coaches over the years. They love having him out there and blocking, and potentially he'll get rewarded kind of with a goal line carry. So I think Kamara is still a low end RB1, and definitely more valuable in PPR leagues. But I think, potentially Jonathan Taylor could probably jump ahead of him here. We should probably, I think, after this, we might want to bump him up above Kamara, just given the role expansion there. Not really any concerns around the goal line and touchdown equity with Anthony Richardson, on IR there still. And as you mentioned, we've kind of been waiting on this for Jonathan Taylor. So I think Jonathan Taylor is for sure locked in RB1. You could say probably a top 5 running back. My only hesitation to put him that high at this point is the Colts do have their bye in week 11. So you are missing out on one more week from JT, but the usage there was certainly great. And the pass game role for Jonathan Taylor as well is pretty strong. And if Josh Downs misses anytime we could see, even more targets funneled to JT.
Exactly. And JT's pass game role, really any running back who's been playing for the Colts pass game role has been strong because Gardner Minshew was throwing so much at either running back, Zach Moss or Jonathan Taylor. So yeah, I feel pretty good about that. One we didn't have on the list before this show, though, I wanted to talk about was Breece Hall, because I know I've said, like, early in the season when Aaron Rodgers first went down, I was scared about Breece Hall. And then it looked like Breece Hall could overcome the mess that is Zach Wilson. As you saw in the game this past week, even with awesome usage, there are times when it's going to be really hard for Breece Hall to get there without making huge plays on his own, because Zach Wilson should be at Safeway bagging groceries instead of quarterbacking the New York Jets. Then we get Aaron Rodgers telling Derwin James, so back in a few weeks, he goes on McAfee. He said it's going to be a few fortnights. Everybody's going to say he's just looking for attention or whatever. We've seen some very fast returns from Achilles injuries. Who was it? Was it Cam Akers that came back in like 6 months and was terrible? But he did come back in 6 months, and he was a running back position. It's not that crazy to think Rodgers would come back in 3 months, maybe for the end of this season. I mean, it's crazy, but I'd give it, a 5 or 10% chance or something. And so if that happened, the Jets play the Commanders in week 16. I would want Jets on my team. When Zach Wilson's out there, it's harder for me to get excited, but like Breece Hall against the Raiders or the Dolphins or the Falcons or the Commanders, like, he's going to be fine with Zach Wilson. In some of the tougher matchups, though, I worry about Breece Hall there when Zach Wilson is under center. All right. I think people have a lot of questions about Detroit backfield. We have been debating what it's going to look like between Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery now that Dave Montgomery is coming back and Jahmyr Gibbs handled the workload so well in Dave Montgomery's absence. I like having both on my team, honestly. I don't think I'd be selling either per se, but you can make a case that if people are valuing either one of these guys as if they are going to consolidate work, that maybe there's a move to be made there. So, Jack, what do you think about Lions backfield moves to make in terms of Montgomery and Gibbs?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's a great offense, and I think that they both have their defined roles. Like Gibbs is going to be more involved in the pass game, and then David Montgomery's just been a touchdown machine all season. We have a multiple year sample of this Lions goal line running back role being extremely lucrative for fantasy with Jamal Williams leading the league in touchdowns last year. So I'm with you that I think both of them are pretty valuable fantasy pieces. I think it's a little bit of a guessing game how much more involved Gibbs is going to be with David Montgomery back. I mean, early in the season, we saw Montgomery just way far ahead on early downs, way far ahead in carries. And people kept almost wish casting for Gibbs to be more involved, and it just didn't happen. Now Dan Campbell is saying we're going to keep Gibbs involved even with Montgomery back. But I think the extent to which that is true is kind of up in the air right now.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting spot. Do you have a take on Detroit backfield, Mark? I think the one thing I think for sure is that Montgomery is going to get goal line work. That's like the thing I'm most confident in.
I would agree there, and I agree that I would like to have both of these guys on my team just with their upcoming schedule and the amount of points we're expecting Detroit to score. I think in they played 3 full games together. In those 3 games, David Montgomery had an absurd 69 rush attempts. Gibbs had 22, so almost 90 combined rush attempts in those 3 games. So it's like a 3-to-1 edge for DeMont so far in those games. I think we can expect it to be closer to like 60-40 or 65-35. So I think Gibbs, or Montgomery, we can expect like between 16 and 20 touches a week, and Gibbs probably between 11 and 15, whereas, a third of his are coming in the pass game. So I think both are going to be valuable, but I agree. Like the thing we can feel most secure on now is David Montgomery has the goal line role. And then I do think there's a chance we could be over projecting how many carries Gibbs gets. So I think I think there's more room for David Montgomery to go up in the rankings than there is with Gibbs. And right now we have Montgomery as RB12 and Gibbs as RB17.
Right. And to be clear, I don't think it's a fluke that Jamal Williams led the league in rushing touchdowns last year, and David Montgomery had a ton of rushing touchdowns when he was healthy also. This is the most run-heavy team in the red zone, and not like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson running in the red zone. Handoffs to David Montgomery or Jamal Williams in the red zone is how they've been executing there. Deebo Samuel's expected back this week. I'm not sure if people realize how big a difference that makes for Ayuk and Kittle projections. I felt real good about playing Kittle in DFS while Deebo was out. Now I think airball is in play. I mean, that's how big the swing is. I was like, yeah, I'm going to get a good game out of Kittle here. Deebo's out. Now with Deebo back, I'm like, Kittle could get 40. He gets stone cold 0. So Mark, is there anything we can do here? Maybe there's some unsuspecting people in our league we could try to trade, but I don't feel great about trading away Ayuk or Kittle either, though. So what do you think about San Francisco stuff right now?
Last week, one of my moves to make was to sell George Kittle. So I do think he's kind of the biggest loser with Deebo back in the lineup. As you mentioned, zero's in play, which is kind of crazy just considering his talent level. But yeah, I think, looking ahead at their schedule, their pass game schedule is extremely favorable. It's top 10 rest of the season, according to Mike Clay. Obviously, they had their bye this past week, so you don't have to worry about buys the rest of the way. So I think if people are a little squeamish on Brandon Ayuk and Deebo, like I would be interested in buying them as, high-end wide receiver 2s, potentially into the wide receiver 1 range. So that would kind of be my moves to make there, if people are willing to get out from under them. But I think people in general do want to have this 49ers offense on their fantasy team anyway. So I think, it might kind of be tough to pry them away.
Last topic to touch on here was the role expansion for Aaron Jones in this game this past week. Sounds like he came out of the game fine with this hamstring injury that seems to be bothering him pretty much all year. I know I've said this a million times. I don't know if I agree or disagree or whatever. I just know that Green Bay thinks when Aaron Jones is a big part of their offense, that's what makes their offense click. And you saw him get 26 opportunities in that game against the Rams. Now, Packers will not get to face Brett Rippon at home every week. Starting this week, they have to go to Pittsburgh, right? Which is going to be a way more difficult task for Aaron Jones to show efficiency and show touchdown upside. Jack, what do you think about handling Aaron Jones after we saw a breakout game finally for him in week 9?
Yeah, I'm pretty bullish on Jones moving forward. I mean, Matt LaFleur himself said that they need to cut him loose. I think what you said makes sense about the Packers thinking Aaron Jones is the engine to their offense makes a lot of sense too. And even if he's not getting 20 carries a game, which obviously should not be the expectation, he's so involved in the passing game. He has a 13.6% target share in the season, even though he's only been playing like less than half a snaps in most games. And now he's finally back, setting a season high in snaps with 57%. So I think it's pretty reasonable to expect a 14 or 15% target share, which is pretty elite for a running back. And that in combination with being the primary back on early downs, I think is a pretty lucrative combo. So I think Jones could pretty easily be an RB1 rest of season.
Okay. I have a couple more topics, but I'm going to save them for the moves to make section here. So let's go ahead and move to your questions that we got on Twitter. Appreciate everyone who did indeed take the time to send in questions. Sharp Not Square says, what should we do with Jalen Waddle? Considered him a fringe wide receiver 1 heading into the year, but he's yet to really break out and has taken a clear back seat to Tyreek's elite season. So Silva and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. Mike McDaniel was asked, what is you looking forward to most over the bye week? And he said, get Jalen Waddle healthy. We've been higher than market on Jalen Waddle for the last couple of years. It was very profitable. Last year, Jalen Waddle was a smash. This year has not been as much. He seems to be banged up, but I agree with Sharp Not Square's point that when Tyreek Hill is getting 30, 40% of the targets in a game, it's hard for other guys to get there as much. Mark, what do you think about the Jalen Waddle stuff right now?
Well, I think the Miami stuff in general is a little bit tricky to diagnose because so far they've been, the most explosive offense in the league. But when they've played good defenses, they've definitely struggled a bit more. And their remaining schedule after their week 10 bye, they get Vegas at home, which, sets up as a great matchup. Then they get the Jets on the road. They go on the road to Washington, another great matchup, and then at Tennessee at home. So like 3 out of 4 good matchups. But the fantasy playoffs is about as brutal as it gets. They get the Jets, the Cowboys, and the Ravens. So, I think potentially, I don't know if you can really get great value for Waddle right now. So I would lean hold if he hopefully he goes off against the Raiders, as Mike McDaniel said. Hopefully he comes out of the bye healthy. They get him a good game, and then I would lean selling at that point if you still can, just because I'm pretty terrified of the playoff schedule for sure. So that's kind of my Waddle take. We, as you mentioned, we're high on him. I have him in a few leagues, so I'm trying to kind of walk that tightrope a little bit. But certainly with how things have gone for him, I don't think people are buying him as like a high end wide receiver 2, which I do think is his ceiling still.
Yeah, playoff schedule thing is bad. I mean, bad. This Jets pass defense is elite. I mean, it is bad. So yeah, it's definitely something to consider when you're thinking about Miami moves. Walt says, what are your expectations for James Cook with playoff Lenny coming to Buffalo? You still think he'll be a startable RB2, or you think he'll be ranked inside the top 24 to 36 territory? I know it's in his name. I know his name is playoff Lenny. I don't think it's going to be that big a factor. Maybe I'm crazy. I think that they signed him as some weak insurance on Damian Harris being done for the year. I'm somewhat concerned that Lenny could come in and play some pass downs, and that wouldn't be great for James Cook. But overall, I'm not worried that much about Lenny. Jack, any thoughts on James Cook rest of season?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a bigger impact on Latavius Murray than it is James Cook. I mean, Latavius is out snapping or out carrying James Cook inside the 5-yard line 8-2. I think maybe Lenny could factor in there. Lenny could also take some pass downs, but I mean, Latavius Murray has also played some pass downs this year, so I don't really think it's going to be a big role change for James Cook. I did kind of get a kick out of the Leonard Fournette himself tweeted that him and Diggs was an elite duo, as if that was the duo that was, striking fear into defenses. But yeah, I think I'm not as high on Lenny's role as he seems to be.
He also tweeted that it's freezing in Buffalo. I was like, buddy, You just learned that it's freezing in Buffalo. Why do you think Leone is so pale? I mean, Jesus Christ. Okay. Let's get to another question here. Oh, Dylan says, hope Adam Levitan doesn't go con queso on a bean burrito again. Fartgate establish the runs. Yeah, I mean, I'll do the jokes around here, Dylan. All right, just leave it alone. Grassman says, do you consider Kyron Williams a sell or a buy low right now? So unfortunately, it doesn't sound like Kyron's gonna be back for week 10. Sounds like he'll be back for week 11. If I understood McVay correctly there, when we last saw Kyron Williams, Mark, he was awesome. Roll was awesome. We have the Stafford injury to figure out as well. What do you think about Kyron? Is he a sell or a buy?
I'll hit on his return first, because unfortunately on IR you have to miss 4 games and not 4 weeks. So with their bye being in week 10 here, he will miss week 11, and week 12 is the earliest he can come back. And so the Rams are another interesting team. I think, like similar to the Dolphins, where I could see things going both ways here. I expect Stafford to come back healthy in week 11, just based on what McVay has said. I don't think Carson Wentz signing there is an indictment on Stafford's health. I think it's more that they saw that, Brett Rippon is just not an option as a backup there. So, but on Kyron specifically, I think, like, as time has gone along and Darrell Henderson has gotten more into the offense and Royce Freeman, like maybe Sean McVay has seen that they can carry a bit of the load, especially on early down rush attempts. I think Kyron is still going to be cemented as the clear pass down back. So, in terms of being a sell or buy, it's really tough. Like the earliest he can come back is week 12. So if you're in line for the playoffs, they do have a good playoff schedule. They get Washington at home in week 15, New Orleans, and then the Giants. So, a pretty solid playoff schedule. Mm-hmm. So I would lean buy if you can. I still think he will be the RB1 there when he returns, but I don't think the role is going to be as elite as it was before he got injured.
I mean, they were trying to kill the kid. And I even tweeted about this. They were giving him like 80 snaps in a game. He was playing, 95% of the snaps. They were trying to kill him. They killed him, and now he's not going to be back until week 12. I agree with Mark. When he comes back, we'll probably see more D-Hendo than we would have seen before. But yeah, I know that the Rams have loved Kyron Williams going back to the start of the 2022 season. And yeah, he's like team captain. They love him. I think he'll be the feature back for those soft playoff games. So yeah, I actually like Kyron Williams as a kind of a sneaky buy. Should not be expensive though, especially since he won't be back until week 12. Good question here from Tobin. Cooper Kupp temperature check. Are you still willing to treat him as a first-round wide receiver in trying to buy him low? I just want to say this. The Rams are 3-6. Matthew Stafford has some finger issue. I expect him back after the bye. I'm worried that they're going to fall so far behind that it's like, why? Why should Cooper Kupp play out the string? Why should Matthew Stafford play out the string? And if, it's fragile. If they go to Carson Wentz, it's not going to be good for Cooper Kupp, So we have Cooper Kupp 15th overall right now, the wide receiver 8. I think that's about right. If Stafford comes back and they win some games, I still think Cooper Kupp can be the number 1 wide receiver. I just am getting increasingly worried that's not going to be the case. So yeah, Jack, what do you think about valuing Cooper Kupp right now in the trade market?
Yeah, he definitely has a lot of risk. I think he's kind of been that guy the whole season where compared to the guys he's ranked near, he has a lot more risk, but the upside, as we saw in his first couple weeks back, it is really amazing. He still has a 30% target share on the year. I mean, the last 3 weeks he has he's averaging 4.1 yards per target. He hasn't scored. So if you're a believer in Stafford coming back, and like you said, the Rams maybe stringing together a couple wins, I think he's a fine buy candidate. But I do think that the floor is basically 0 with him, as it has been kind of the entire season.
Okay. Sean asked about Chris Olave. He asked about a bunch of guys, but I do want to focus on Olave here. What to do with Olave? He says Olave isn't running any layup routes and Carr is quitting on plays too early and checking down. Should be selling low on Chris Olave. So, I've thought and talked about this a ton. How wide receivers are used makes a huge difference for fantasy. Like this slot plus role that Amon-Ra St. Brown and Cooper Kupp and CeeDee Lamb and all these guys have, they get targets that the defense just gives them. Like Cooper Kupp, go run 6 yards, stand there, I'm going to throw you the ball. and the defense gives that to you. And they don't do that at all for Chris Olave. Chris Olave never gets any chances like that. And that is hard to overcome. So yes, I do think Chris Olave should be downgraded. I don't know how everyone else is thinking about Chris Olave, though, in your league. I still think he's a pretty good option, a good asset to have. But yeah, I've been downgrading him just on the way that he's been used. This last spot that he had against the Bears was such a good spot. I know he caught a touchdown, but still only 46 yards was frustrating. So yeah, Mark, would you be selling low now on Chris Olave, or what do you think about handling him?
I don't think so. I'd be more in the camp of buying Olave and just hope it clicks and, betting on talent. It's certainly a fair criticism to say he's not getting the layup targets and that maybe, the combination with he and Derek Carr just won't get there this year. But I still think the upside, I mean, he's sixth right now among wide receivers and targets in the NFL, and like the Saints offense and their matchups the rest of the way. I mean, we came into the season knowing they had the softest schedule in the NFL, and it continues to be that. I would still lean more so buy on Olave and just hope that the talents and, the targets that he's getting turn into more receptions down the road.
Yeah, I wouldn't say sell or buy. I would probably just say hold on Olave. Like, I don't think there's really much I could do right now with Olave. I don't really want to sell low. Jay Sharp says he has both Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud. Don't want to carry two quarterbacks. Who has the better rest of season outlook? So yeah, I mean, this is what happens when you get into late round quarterback stuff. You find one that hits, and then all of a sudden you have two options every week. We have Trevor Lawrence 15 spots ahead in the rankings, but only a few spots ahead in the quarterback rankings. Jack, what do you think about T-Law versus Stroud right now?
Yeah, I think if you need to drop one of them, I'd probably drop Stroud. But the thing with Lawrence is that in the first week of the playoffs, he plays the Ravens. The week before that, he plays the Browns. So those are two pretty brutal matchups, although Stroud does play the Browns in week 15. So two tough matchups for both of them. I do think Lawrence is the guy I would prefer from a long-term perspective, but it is hard to just drop Stroud at this point. So I would at least test the waters, see what you can get for Stroud, especially off the game he just had. I feel like someone's got to be willing to trade for him. So that's probably what I would be doing. I think it would be really tough to just outright drop Lawrence or Stroud unless your benches are pretty small.
All right. Last one here. Jake says, hoping you can touch on playoff stashes for good teams. I've been holding Jameson Williams and Marvin Mims with that hope, but I feel like since the trade deadline, both these guys took a hit. Yeah, I dropped Mims and Jameson in a couple spots. Jameson, is going to be contending with DPJ now for targets also, and obviously Marvin Mims is at best the number 3 wide receiver for a pretty bad Broncos offense. So I agree with that. I think stashes I would be thinking about are a lot of the guys that Sam and I talked about on the waiver show yesterday, running backs who are one injury away from being elite, and that's like the first thing I would do. The second thing that I would do for playoff stashes is handcuffs on my own team. If I have a really good team and I'm through buys, I'm through injuries, I can more safely roster handcuffs on my own team. And then there's always the late year rookie ascent stuff. It's been horrible for Quentin Johnston. If somebody dropped him and I had a really good team, I might hold Quentin Johnston on my bench for a while and see if we can turn it around. Guys like that. Mark, you have any ideas for people who have really good teams trying to stash some guys?
I definitely agree on the high upside running back stashes. That would be my number one priority. In terms of wide receivers, there are a few guys I like. I think Rashad Bateman is an interesting stash.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, there's a potential that OBJ could get hurt. Bateman's role has risen the last couple of weeks. He's been getting more involved. I think Trey Palmer of the Buccaneers is somewhat interesting. If he's been running over 70% of the routes the last few weeks, if Chris Godwin or Mike Evans got injured, he could step into a bigger role. And then I think Michael Wilson of the Cardinals is another interesting rookie wide receiver stash, just with Kyler coming back there. They don't have a great playoff schedule and a bye in week 14, but let's say if Marquise Brown went down or something, I think the Arizona offense is a little bit more exciting to invest in with Kyler back at the helm. So those would be my 3 wide receivers I'll toss out.
Yeah. For sure. I think those are good ones. Noah Gray, if something were to happen to Travis Kelce, I think would be pretty decent. And obviously Isaiah Likely if something happens to Mark Andrews. And not just happens, like these guys could rest in week 17, it's not out of the question. All right. It's time for everybody's favorite portion of the program. The moves to make ahead of week 10. Jack, I'll give you the floor first for your first move to make.
Yeah, I'm going to start with sell Gus Edwards, and he did have just 5 carries, so if anyone in your league sees that and is panicking, you might not be able to get very much, but he also had 2 touchdowns, so the fantasy points look good. You could maybe sell your league mates on his goal line roll, which should continue to be good, but Keaton Mitchell was just unbelievable on Sunday. He had 2 runs over 14 yards or over 40 yards. He averaged 15 yards a carry. And then the Ravens came out after the game and said that they're going to continue to mix in all 3 back. So I don't really I think Gus Edwards will be back to the primary role after he was running third for most of the day in week 9. But I think that he's not going to be very involved as a receiver. And any Keaton Mitchell involvement is pretty bad for Edwards because he's so reliant on getting 15 carries for fantasy value. So if Keaton Mitchell's taking 5 of those, it's not great. I think Gus is going to score touchdowns, but if he's not scoring touchdowns, he's going to be super frustrating. And coming off a day in which he had 2 touchdowns and we basically saw his worst fears realized, where Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell both played as much, if not ahead of him, I think I'd be trying to sell if I could get something.
There's also going to be a regression in Lamar Jackson's touchdown throwing rate, right? I mean, they've scored a bazillion points, and Lamar Jackson has only thrown 9 touchdowns in 9 weeks. I mean, he's going to start throwing more touchdowns, I think, and some of the rushing touchdowns will fall off there. So, yeah, certainly like selling Gus Edwards if you can. I think Mark said one of his friends got Gus Edwards for Sam Laporta. That seems like a really good deal to me if you need tight end help. Mark, go ahead with your first move to make.
I'm going to go with buy Amon-Ra St. Brown. And this one is, certainly a little tough because he's a wide receiver 1. I don't think anyone thinks like he's a fluke at all anymore. But I just think the rest of the season schedule and role for St. Brown should be absolutely elite. He has 9+ targets in 23 of his last 27 games with more than 50% of snaps. I mentioned elite remaining schedule. 7 of their next 8 games in terms of, the fantasy schedule all come in a dome. Their playoff schedule is great as well. Should be back and forth shootouts. They get Denver at home, at Minnesota, at Dallas. Like I think that aligns super well. So, I think if you are looking towards the playoffs, have a good shot at it. I think this is a great chance for you to combine like 2 to 3 players that are, maybe in the wide receiver 2 to 3 range and go get Amon-Ra. I think he's set up to be a league winner this year down the stretch. And then I also mentioned, being a little scared of the Dolphins. Like, I don't think it's crazy to trade Tyreek Hill and get Amon-Ra and maybe someone else. I think that is kind of like an interesting move, just given the Dolphins playoff schedule and how elite Tyreek has been. Like, I think you could argue that Amon-Ra's floor is just as good as Tyreek's down the stretch, given the matchups. So I think he's just a great buy right now. And like I said, potential league winner.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be an interesting move. Trading Tyreek Hill would be something that like I'm not sure I could physically do, but you could get Amon-Ra and hopefully Amon-Ra plus a lot more if you were actually giving up Tyreek Hill. I'll go with one that nobody's going to like. The Atlanta Falcons have lost 3 of their last 4 games. They have lost 5 of their last 7 games. They play on the road against one of the worst teams in the league, but it's getting Kyler Murray back this week in Arizona. After that, they're on a bye. If you are the owner or the GM of the Atlanta Falcons and you have been humiliated by Arthur Smith, and humiliated because you spent the number 4 overall pick on Kyle Pitts, you spent the number 8 overall pick on Bijan Robinson, and then your head coach goes out there and makes you look like an idiot because he plays these guys that you valued so highly behind Tyler Algier and Jonnu Smith. So I don't think it's crazy to think Arthur Smith could be fired and or pressured into actually using Bijan Robinson. Now, I understand we're wish casting, but I think it's at least in the range of outcomes. And by the way, we have Bijan 44th overall in our top 150. I guarantee you, in 95% of most people's heads who have Bijan Robinson, they rank him like 200th overall right now. Like they are on massive life tilt about having Bijan Robinson on their team. I'm on massive life tilt from playing him in DFS last week. Okay.
Me
So
too.
I understand. You can get Bijan Robinson, I think, for way less than 44th overall value at Arizona. Even with Arthur Smith, I think Bijan can have a good game here at Arizona. Then the bye, New Orleans. But in the playoffs, Carolina, Indianapolis, and Chicago. Let me repeat that. In the fantasy playoffs, Atlanta gets Carolina, Indianapolis, which is like the fastest team in the league, and a great matchup, and then Chicago. So, look, man, it's not going to be comfortable. But if you haven't had Bijan this whole time, you shouldn't be on tilt anyways. So trading like an 8th round asset or something to get him is something I would at least explore. And then what you do is you go ham on Twitter trying to get Arthur Smith fired. It'll be a great day. Okay. Jack, your second move to make.
Yeah, my second move to make, I'm going to go with by Javonte Williams. He only has 1 touchdown the entire year, and he hasn't been that great from an efficiency perspective, but the last time we saw him play in week 8, he had 27 carries, and Jaleel McLaughlin and Samaje Perine had a combined 5. He has the Broncos throw the ball 29.7% of the time to their running backs. So that's the highest in the league by 5 percentage points. So even though Samaje Perine is getting the third down work, Williams is still plenty involved in the passing game. And then Jaleel McLaughlin's usage has gone down the past couple weeks. And then coming off the bye, I mean, going into the season, Javonte Williams was a guy who we were concerned about the health. He was coming off a major injury, a pretty bad knee injury. And he hasn't been the same type of player that we saw from him earlier in his career. But I think it makes sense that he gets healthier throughout the year. Now he's had 2 weeks to rest the knee, and we've seen the usage tick up. I think over the second half of the season, Javonte Williams could get back to his old self, and we know the usage is going to be there. So I like buying him right now.
All right. Buy Javonte Williams. Certainly really good usage for Javonte in that game before the bye. Mark, your second and final move to make this week.
If Amon-Ra is too big of a swing, I think this is a nice fallback option at wide receiver. I'm going to go with by DeAndre Hopkins. Will Levis was announced as the starting quarterback for the rest of the season for the Titans, which I think is probably good news for DeAndre Hopkins. It's been a great season for Hopkins despite this low passing volume offense in Tennessee. Hopkins in his age 31 season has a 20+% target share in every game, career high 15.2 yard ADOT. Career high 2.44 yards per route run and a career high 16.1 yards per reception. So obviously a lot of that is buoyed by that 3 touchdown game he had in Levis's debut where he was catching the long shots. But I do think their remaining schedule is pretty favorable. It should be top half of the wide receiver schedule remaining. They play Houston twice in the fantasy playoffs, which we've seen kind of how things have gone with CJ Stroud. Those games can turn into shootouts. So I think Hopkins right now, people still probably think he's old and that, the production hasn't been amazing so far this year. And I think he's a wide receiver too, the rest of the way. So I'm going to say bye DeAndre Hopkins.
All right. Yeah, I do think Will Levis, I agree with Mark that Will Levis is an upgrade for DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, Will Levis effortlessly gets the ball downfield and actually showed really good touch too. And so, yeah, excited to watch Will Levis again this week. My final move to make is going to be a repeat. And I don't like doing repeats, but I really do want to hammer this one home. I know Jack brought this one up a couple weeks ago. Hopefully you guys were able to execute on it. It was sell Raheem Mostert. But if you haven't done it yet, I feel like now is the time. People are still really excited about Raheem Mostert, and I get it. He's been incredible. However, bye then at the Bucks is a tough spot. But more importantly, in the fantasy playoffs, what you're getting, I'm sorry, that was the wrong one. Bye and then Raiders is obviously a good spot. But in the playoffs, as we already talked about, Jets, Cowboys, Ravens is like the worst possible setup for Raheem Mostert. We're also expecting Devon Achane back after the bye. Raheem Mostert is also 31 years old and is getting 14 touches per game this year. He's going to wear down. We saw Salvon Ahmed and Jeff Wilson played plenty in these games where Devon Achane was out. And so you can sell Raheem Mostert on what he's done so far this year. I do not think that is anywhere near the expectation of what he should be going forward. You know, it's important. He hasn't had his bye yet. It's this week. And the playoff schedule is brutal. And I think those are important things at this time of year. All right. That is going to do it for this rest of season top 150 show. If you don't have your in-season package yet or Draft Kit Pro, you can get that and have full access anytime to our rest of season top 150 rankings. For Jack, for Mark, for producer Ryan, for producer Steven, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.